Okay, well, thank you so much to the organizers for giving me the opportunity to speak about a project that our lab is really excited about. I've been working on a PhD for the last 5 years through the computer science department at CU, but my questions are genetic in nature. I'm interested in DNA and what makes you you. So just to kind of get into it, I think it takes very little convincing that our society is extremely diverse, at least phenotypically speaking, but our DNA, our genome is extraordinarily similar. Only 0.5% of our, 99.5% of our DNA is exactly the same, and we need to reconcile the fact that we see such extreme phenotypic differences. Well, we need to reconcile the fact that there's such extreme phenotypes given only 0.5% genetic dissimilarity. And of course, with very little convincing, I'm sure you are active readers, but our DNA plays a huge role in health and disease. Mutations in BRCA1 and BUP3 are known to confer higher likelihoods of cancer. Mutations in these other key genes correlate very well with cystic fibrosis and Huntington's disease. And again, this is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the genetic associations we're now currently linking between genotypes and diseases. So if this is our goal here, to understand what makes us us, and also just from a human health medicine standpoint, we would like to study DNA. So how do we do that? Well, one way to do it is to just look at it. And here I'm showing an extremely small portion of the human genome. And incidentally enough, the average human reader reads at about 40 words per minute. It would take you about 30 years of consistent, constant reading to scan the entire human genome. Now, of course, even if you were able to decipher the code, if you come across a word like ACGA, blah, 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 it doesn't really mean anything to you. So in short, from a computational standpoint, this boils down to a problem of scale and interpretability. Scale in terms of just the sheer size of the genome, so lots of really interesting algorithm design, and interpretability in terms of designing models that give us biologically meaningful parameters back. Oh gosh. So you say, Joey, if the problem is scale, why not just look for mutations within genes? And I would say, well, that's a good place to start, but interestingly enough, 81% of the genotypes that are associated with diseases do not actually occur within genes. They occur within areas that are called regulatory DNA or regulatory elements. I would love to talk about regulatory DNA and the biology and interesting biochemistry behind it after the talk, but I just hope that you can take the statistic at face value and justify my push here that what we really need are computational and experimental methods to identify regulatory DNA. So that's kind of where our lab works at the interface. I look at the design of the algorithms, and we have part of our lab working at the actual experimental protocols to identify regulatory DNA. So this is a typical signal from regulatory DNA. We're zoomed in on a very small portion of chromosome 1. The height of the bar correlates with the probability that we observe this specific region of the genome. The higher the bar, the more likely it is to be regulatory. Now, if some of you are very familiar with topic modeling or mixture modeling, you would look at this data and you would say clearly, I mean not clearly, but if you squint, there exist 3 subpopulations or sub-random variables within this data. And that's exactly what I did. I derived expectation maximization algorithm to identify these subpopulations. If you care about the scary math, again, I'd be happy to talk to you about it. Incidentally, if you're familiar with topic models, your component densities tend to be multinomial, or familiar with Gaussians, the typical bell curve. Here, we're trying to model the biology, so the component densities are actually a convolved distribution that is very non-exponential family. And in short, it's very hard to develop new theory for it. But I hope you take it at my face value here that we can now ID regulatory elements. So now the question becomes, okay, you have all these regulatory elements across the entire genome. What can you do with it? Well, we did exactly what you'd expect. We were data parasites, so we went to other consortiums and downloaded data from epigenetics, sequence information, obviously, since we care about the genotype, gene expression data, so the levels of transcription at genes. Got lots of very interesting results back from that paper in submission. But perhaps the most interesting thing that we're really excited about is we took this model, we applied it to over 500 different experiments, and we did exactly what you'd expect, bicycle clustering. So the rows here are a sample coming from this technique called row seq, which is giving us the regulatory DNA. The columns are regulatory elements, and you can see that there's some elements that are consistent across all samples. These are kind of your constitutively active elements. But then there are also elements that are very discriminative of specific samples. So we would like to know, number one, what these elements are, and two, what are the high-flow clustering really picking up on. So when we color our data matrix based on where the sample was derived from, whether it was derived from a leukemia cell or an embryonic stem cell or a blood cell, we realize that there's extreme modularity in our gene regulatory network or our regulatory DNA network based on these phenotypes. And this is very, very exciting to us because the method that I'm referring to is a lot cheaper. The modeling framework is very simple for the most part. So we believe this is a strong tool to understand the phenotypic consequences of regulatory DNA and perhaps the phenotypic consequences of a novel genotype. So we're interested in applying this for diagnostics, treating novel genotypes, and doing drug screening. These are lots of buzzwords. You can back them up, I'm sure. You should talk to me afterwards. But I really appreciate the opportunity. Send me an email if you have interest in these sorts of questions. My website is there. I'll take any questions. Thank you.
But who's got questions? I think you've got one right there. So we're getting you a mic, but in order to let people to hear it, we have to repeat the question.
Hi, how are you? Great to speak to you. Great information on my life. I'm just wondering if there's any way for you to, from a regulatory standpoint, understand O negative blood from a DNA perspective.
So the question was, is the regulatory DNA signal from O negative blood? Is that correct?
Yes.
I'm not familiar too much with that literature, but that is a cell type, and absolutely. The data type we would need is to do this global run-on sequencing, which I'm not really talking about, post the model, and then yes, there are likely mutations within regulatory DNA that are conferring a decrease or an increase of nearby gene expression that are giving rise to cell identity. So I'm not really not going to really talk too much about this, but if you're familiar with the groundbreaking work of taking an embryonic stem cell and making it into like a muscle cell, these are done by activating specific factors called transcription factors, and they bind regulatory DNA. So what we're picking up on, the signal I think that we're picking up on is kind of ghost signal from these TFs, these transcription factors. So in short, I believe that there exists signal there. Yeah. Yep.
This is from a person who knows nothing about biology, but how likely would you say you'd be able to predict that somebody has a certain type of cancer based on feeding their raw genome into your model?
Good. That's such a great. The question was, can you predict cancerous cell types based on this model? The answer is absolutely yes. We did. Fortunately, and again, we're just data parasites, we downloaded data from colon cancer, leukemia, cervical cancer. I mean, I think there were like 20 different samples, and performing hyperclustering after the fact, we saw separation beautifully based on cancer subtype. So I'm really excited about the idea of using this as a diagnostic tool, honing in on specific regulatory elements, looking at their expression profile, and giving it to doctors, basically. There are specific types of cancer where doctors train for 10 years by looking at slides, and the error rate is, 1 in 3. So if you're trying to tell a patient that you do or don't have cancer based on these slides, this is probably not the best method. Computational methods or data science methods like this one, I think, might be the forefront.
More questions? Last one, right in the back.
The three-part model there.
Yeah.
Is that based on a specific polynomial or what kind of mathematical shape?
Great. So it's not a regression method, we're performing density estimation like you'd be familiar with, like kernel density, except that our components are exponentially modified Gaussian distributions. And this comes from the convolution of a bell curve or normal distribution plus an exponential. So they're heavy-tailed and they include lots of skew, and this is exactly what we're observing. Is that going to go? Observing in the data. We observe lots of skew. So that's what they are.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
All right, we are all ready for Katherine. Your time won't start until we actually get you up. Okay. I'm going to be standing with my hand. Okay.
So hi, my name is Katherine Misken, and I'm going to talk about the ecological and human health risk assessments that have been done at Rocky Flats. I actually worked on some of these many years ago, but I can't find any of the things I put together published online, and I have a bit of a disclosure here. While I was putting this talk together, I made a mistake, and I read a book called Data and Goliath by Bruce Schneier, which is about information security and surveillance. And Rocky Flats has been something of a hot topic in this area for probably 30 years or more. So I am being very careful about citing all of my sources. So it's only public data, yeah, I'm actually really nervous about adding another comment to my FBI file by giving this talk. So the first question, okay.
So, you guys are letting out? Really extremely loud? Keep over that.
Cool. Yeah. Okay. If you can't hear me in the back, jump up and down, something like that. Sounds like it's going to get loud in here. Too far away? Okay. So maybe what? Closer. Okay. So maybe the first thing for Rocky Flats is to talk about where it is. So if you drive south of here to Boulder on 93, it's on the east side of the road. This is a map of the plant site. And the central dark shaded area is kind of the plant site where they actually manufactured plutonium triggers for nuclear weapons until 1989. So from about 1954 to 1989. The lighter shaded area is the outside plant, so they had a pretty big perimeter. And then there are some off-site areas that are of interest to this talk as well. Great Western Reservoir and Stanley Lake, which we'll be talking about here in a second. So looking at Rocky Flats, maybe the first question is, how are we going to determine if anything there is in fact contaminated? And if so, is that contamination a problem? So there's two basic ways that we address that. The first one is with an ecological risk assessment, where we look at the ecology, we look at the organisms and species that are available on the site to potentially get contaminated, and also what contamination we find. And we try to see if there's an overlap between what can be exposed to something and what's actually toxic, to see if there's risk. So in terms of building models, which this will probably be the closest I come to a model, we actually use the food webs that you talked about in junior high science class to build the model of what your potential exposures are. So when I look at a slide like this, for instance, there might be a relatively clean-looking water column, which is not being contaminant, but you might find quite a bit in the sediments. And as you model that, it may be getting absorbed by insects and who are eaten by fish or birds, and so you see bioaccumulation and bioconcentration of the food chain. Those are actually some pretty complicated models to put together. You guys make a lot of assumptions about exposure, about toxicity. You extrapolate from one species or one venue to another. So they're very complicated models to put together. So for Rocky Flats, what did that show? We came up, the studies that have been published show quite a few things that did have some toxicity to the environment. So aquatic life was showing volatile and semi-volatile organic compounds. We were seeing metals and PCBs. Birds were seeing PCBs in mercury, which are pretty hazardous. And we were seeing it in raptors and also small mammals. What we did not see here is perhaps more interesting, which is plutonium and americium, the kind of, and uranium, the kind of scary radionuclides out there, turning up in as contaminants are concerned. We were well below risk levels there. So we did the same basic things for humans, although when we do it for humans, we do it a little bit differently. So instead of building a food web, we have really fun books full of estimates of how much water you ingest by accident when you go swimming. And came up with some fairly similar conclusions. Plutonium and uranium environmental exposures were typically well below background on the plant site. So when we look at the actual radionuclide risk, which is what most people really want to know about rocky flats, we're looking for a median risk, which is a great unbiased estimator of central tendency, about 2 in a million. Pretty close to your odds of being struck by lightning. So, do you feel any better about the risks at Rocky Flats? Anybody feel better? Most people don't after you hear that data, and here's why. There have been a few accidents at Rocky Flats. So there were 2 big fires, one in 1957 and one in 1959, or 1969, excuse me. There was a tritium release in 1973 to surface water from a facility that was never intended to handle heavy water. So there have been a couple of instances out there that produce some concern. So this is just a quick rundown of the releases of plutonium to the environment from the fires. The big one was the 1957 fire, which predates most of us. So the real risk, the risks I just talked about, were from Rocky Flats plant sites. Those are not the things most of us are really concerned about. The off-site exposures of Rocky Flats tend to be a lot more interesting and much more poorly characterized in studies. So I want to talk about the fires just briefly because that's kind of the biggest one. This is a smokestack. What I want you to get out of my picture of the smokestack is that there's a shadow effect around the smokestack. There's a point at which if you live close enough to the smokestack, you're actually protected because it takes a while for things to settle out. That plays into our model of where contamination would occur in the event of a fire. So this is a windrose, which shows where the wind typically blows, which is due west, which will play into part of why I live in Boulder. So this is an example. This is one of 4 plutonium estimates, distribution estimates from the 1957 fire, which was the largest release, and how the plutonium was distributed on the plant site. You notice with high winds, most of it did not land on the plant site. Most of it, according to this map, went to our bad. So the problem here is that the source of the contamination is not where it stays. This is, I'll skip the regulatory environment. This is where we get into some interesting questions about risk communication, because we're in a situation here that the combination of all of these switch from different risks and different hazard levels. Rocky Flats as a site has, if you look at the factors to increase outrage, to increase the hazard of what goes on with your data, has done a lot of these fairly poorly. So, you know, it has catastrophic potential. There's some question with the fires about whether or not they achieved criticality. There's been a lot of media attention. There have been incidents like Department of Justice and EPA raids on the site. So they've done a lot of things to make it harder to communicate what the actual risks are. Okay. So, anyway, that's just kind of a high-level overview of the toxicology and the risk assessments at Rocky Flats. So, are there any questions?
Now, I know she has a few extra slides, so try to figure out what they are so that she can show them to you. Who's got questions?
I have one.
Awesome.
I'd really like to see that last slide.
So as a risk assessor, yes, what's your question? about the slides.
What are your favorite rational fears?
So the question was, what are my favorite rational fears? And as a risk assessor, I do sometimes look at numbers differently from other people. So my favorite rational fear is driving. It's probably the most dangerous thing that I do since I don't smoke. Sitting is the new smoking, so that's at the top of my list in terms of hazards. One of my favorite fears that I think people got a taste of a couple of years ago is a 25-year flood in Boulder, because that will wipe out things like the library, which when they built it could not be insured because of the floodplain. The city took on that responsibility. And in terms of toxic sites around the Denver area, I'm actually not terribly scared about rocky flats. I mitigated most of my risk by living in Boulder, or not even in the windrose forest. But the Rocky Mountain Arsenal is pretty terrifying. It's one of the few places in the country where Baskin Basin F was in the ground. It has since been remediated. So I should clarify that this is no longer the case. It was one of the few places where birds could land on the surface of Basin F, and they would simply sink and die. It was that contaminated. Rocky Mountain Arsenal actually manufactured war gases and pesticides for almost 50 years. The stuff out there will really kill you. The stuff at Rocky Flats can, but it's a lot harder. So, what else? Yes. I'm sorry?
What's my risk factor in our model?
So they have, it depends on where you are in Arvada, Westminster. They've just switched one of the water supplies over, so I believe there is now a bypass for Stanley Lake in the water supply. They turned off Great Western Reservoir as a water supply in 1997. Plutonium as a risk is not, by itself, is not a terribly high risk outside of your body. It emits primarily alpha radiation, which doesn't travel. However, if you get that inside your body, it's like letting a truck drive around in your cell. It's very damaging. So as long as this is where it's not been well characterized. You don't know. I would say in general it's probably fairly low if you don't have, 50-year-old dust in your basement somewhere. Probably not too bad. My personal take is it's more about people's fear of that than it is about the risk itself, and the fear produces its own problem. Does that help? It never does.
One more question.
Hi. Looking at these slides, it looks like
So no, none of it's from the OU, the solar evaporation pond. So those are definitely part of it. The solar evaporation, there's your question, just whether it was done or what the situation was with the solar pond. So there have been quite a number of studies produced on Rocky Flats over the years with different groups. I didn't find, nothing I cited is specifically from that. It tends to be more from the Radiological Risk Assessment Corporation, risk assessments on Rocky Flats.
Okay. The question that I had was, in retrospect, what would you have done differently with assumptions you've made for risk models?
So the question was, in retrospect, what would I do differently with the assumptions made for the risk model? Most of the assumptions and the data that I have seen has been, the scientific assumptions behind them have been generally valid and generally conservative. So it may sound surprising, but I have a pretty high level of confidence in the results. When I look at radiologic risk and see that it's relatively low, unless you were in the unfortunate situation of being like a worker on site with plutonium in the air vents, where your risk can be fairly high. Most of them I think have been pretty good. As always, one of the things we would like is more current tissue data. So that's kind of one of the, getting out and getting actual human information is one of the things that is often not done and has not been collected here. The other big thing that I would really like to see is more off-site information. Thank you. Okay.
I just want to point out, this is our second meetup here, and that was so much louder than we expected. Katherine, you handled it like a trooper. Thank you so much. You did great. Up next is Chris Largo. All right.
Hey guys, I'm an assistant professor in the newly created College of Media, Communication, and Information here at CU Boulder, really designed at taking a lot of innovative disciplines and applying them. So my title is in Big Data and Analytics. I fought to get the big removed from that, but you'll have to bear the buzzword. But really what I do is I take a lot of problems that we have in the communication discipline and I apply Big Data and Analytics to them. I was talking to some of my colleagues in psychology and some of my colleagues at the National Institute of Health, and over drinks one night we were talking. We really wanted to try to figure out why in the world would people on Twitter flock to Twitter and start talking about vaccines and autism as if the two were related. So we noticed that there was, at least a couple of years ago, there was a real big outburst of this vaccines cause autism talk on Twitter. So we really wanted to figure out what could we do to kind of explain this behavior. So a lot of different ways, from the social side, it's kind of try to figure out who these people are. But I thought we could start by actually just looking at the behavior and seeing where it was in the country. So it started with downloading lots and lots of tweets, millions of tweets mentioning vaccines and autism. And so we did that over 6 years. And then the next step was really trying to terse out the talk that actually was the anti-vax talk, right? So that's the next step in this. So we had lots of students reading lots of tweets and annotating them, saying if they were anti-vax or not. So we kind of had several rounds of machine learning and iterative process using liblinear as our model, and we really were able to get a really good accuracy. I didn't put the kappa here, but the kappa was acceptable as well. So at the end of the day, we found about 100,000 messages on Twitter over the 6 years that were very clearly things like you see here, talking about autism and vaccines as if the two were related. So the next step is, once we had the data, was actually geo-resolving it across the country. So figuring out where these people actually were, and then marrying that with census data. So figuring out what it was about these different regions that we could use to kind of explain why certain regions were exhibiting higher amounts of this behavior and certain regions were exhibiting less. So if you kind of look at the map, as a result of what we got here, there's a lot of data where we don't have areas, any data at all. But I think that's really just a result of how the census defines micro and metro areas, and it's also a result of, Twitter is not all about it in areas where there isn't a high population. But you can clearly see that there are pockets of anti-vax talk, and that's interesting in itself. But we really wanted to go beyond this and say, well, what is it about these areas that have the high propensities? So looking at lots of different possible census variables, it's possible to predict whether a certain area was higher than another. We ended up settling on a lasso regression, or a lasso regression, as I'm being told it's actually pronounced. You can see that, really, you can't see the feature names here, and I don't expect you to really get a lot from this other than just looking at the geographic area in which something was set, looking at census characteristics of that area. We can predict an R-squared that was pretty stable, around 61%. So we're being able to explain a very substantial proportion of why this talk is happening just by looking at the regions in which these tweets came from. So certainly this thing, the actual idea of thinking, well, what causes someone to think that these two things are related, as vaccines and autism? Certainly there's some type of personal characteristic. But this data is saying that, even just looking at the area, there is some type of social aspect of living in certain areas that can make the to talk more prevalence. So what were those features? Well, it turns out that across the board, the biggest predictor was the amount of women in a particular area with a bachelor's degree. The more bachelor's degrees, the higher the propensity for these messages. The effect was bolstered when we saw people, women that were married, and the effect was bolstered yet again, the strongest possible effect when people were married, and then also women were married and also had a birth in the last 12 months. So we saw that pretty across the board. Some other characteristics that tended to make this belief more prevalent was when we saw areas where there were more births by women aged 40 to 44, so later births, and then also in income areas that were pretty low, so lower income areas, this is more likely to be seen. We did test a lot of census variables, which is significant, and the things that were significant, we want to make sure that we mentioned we did test things like population, age, and sex, and those things alone don't explain any unique variants. So it really was these specific census variables that really kind of drove this discussion. And I think that when you look at a problem like this, obviously it's not just where people live. There's a lot of individual level characteristics that predict this, but just looking at census data, being able to explain this as much as health practitioners, the next step with the NIH and the like is trying to identify where particular areas of the countries are where these factors are kind of in play, and trying to make physicians aware of this and making sure that they're educated and knowing that they're in a high-risk area or a low-risk area for people to believe something as outlandish as vaccines cause autism. So, yeah, that's it. I'll open it up to questions. I will say at CU Boulder, we're really interested in sharing data and working with people with interesting questions. So, you talk to me afterwards if you want to get involved. We're doing some really cool stuff in our college. It's an honor to be here.
Could you go back to the last slide?
Yeah.
So you say 40 to 44-year-old women. Is there a correlation between autism and later pregnancy?
Yeah, I mean, in general, yes. And so I think that's sadly what we're seeing there. The question was, do later pregnancies tend to have higher rates of autism? The answer is yes. And I think that sadly what we're seeing here is some wishful thinking, right? Not to elaborate too much, but
Thank you.
yeah.
Did you see any temporal issues like timing of?
Do you see any temporal issues, specifically timing of tweets or seasonality of tweets, as well as timing following, say, a popular blog post or something?
Absolutely. So the question is the data temporal, and are there particular issues in lumping 6 years of data together into one analysis? Absolutely. So what we're doing right now is some time series approaches, and what really is more qualitative work, and it's kind of looking at a lot of these different states across time and seeing if there are peaks and if there are any particular reasons for those peaks. And just as important, looking to see if over time certain areas of the country stop believing in this myth, and if there were any kind of intervention techniques or any kind of public awareness campaigns that might have sparked that. So that's the next step, is kind of qualitatively looking into the data and saying, was anything here successful in quelling this myth, or is anything successful in telling this myth? And I think that's where time series analysis for us is really going to become really valuable in being able to look at the data. Great question.
Good question. Couple of them.
Yeah.
It takes a second.
Hello.
Hi.
So we all know that in human behavior, demographics play a small part. Lifestyles can play a big part, and as can behavioral factors. However, I'm in the marketing field, there's all these sources of marketing-based data that go beyond demographics, and I just wondered if you had access to any of that, and if so, if there are any types of lifestyles or behaviors that came about or correlated to the way those acts.
So the question is, are there particular psychographic or other data sets that might explain other behaviors in different areas of the country that kind of use to regret and look at the same type of analyses? And the answer is It's really difficult to get it to sync up with census data at a microscopic level. So we were looking at MSAs and micro areas and metro areas with the census data. Another way to look at these types of analyses is kind of doing a tract level census analysis. A lot of the data sets that we see are, in broader areas. So for instance, I do a lot of advertising research. A lot of the data that we get is in EMAs or completely different areas. And so there's a lot of smoothing and a lot of things that you gotta have to do to get the data to play to the same areas. A lot of averaging, a lot of guesswork. So the answer is, I think yes. I think you could explain more variance. I think you could get down to specific behaviors. I'm certain that it would boost that R squared. But do I have any additional data? No. If you do, please, again, this is where collaboration here really does help us. The more data sets we have, the more novelty to the data set, potentially the more advantageous findings. So that's something to think about. But the big thing for us is finding something that syncs up with the census data, or syncs up with resolving the data in a certain way. So what we did with Twitter is we kind of parsed out people's self-reported locations, right? So where they said they were from, or their geotag coordinates. So we used both of those pieces of data. Really hard to resolve someone beyond the level of like a city or even like an area, right? You might say I'm from Denver, but actually live in any of the areas surrounding. So it's one of those things where the data was probably the primary issue. There's a lot of prospects.
And one last question.
So did you only use Twitter?
Yeah, so the question is, was the data exclusive to Twitter? Yes, expressions solely on Twitter, and that is because, it's so open and it's so easily to look at the history. We used a service that was called Radiant 6. It kind of has a historical Twitter database that we could afford. So that was what we used. We would love to use GitHub, but again, we're just core social scientists. So what can we do? Yeah.
I was counter immunization, right?
Yeah.
I think that you're missing out a lot on minorities who do not use Twitter. You're probably, I hope you're not doing this, but you're probably missing the entire Latino community, which is all by word of mouth. Often agents at Twitter. I don't know how to tweet, that's not like because I haven't learned. So I think you might be biasing for data to more educated people who don't have a pretty comfortable with that. Also, not just in Fairfax County, Douglas County, highly educated, high income, very low vaccination.
Yeah, so that's something. So the question is the data bias because of Twitter? Absolutely. Not representative. I think any kind of claim you make with Twitter data in general, especially from social science or even science point of view, you have to be very careful saying what you're finding. We're just looking at the data and trying to explain the variance based on the data we have. Right? We're not making claims. These are the people that are most likely to believe that vaccines cause autism. That's a leap way beyond what the data is actually saying. You're right. Certainly, I believe that Twitter is well is used in certain ways, but also not in others. And there's going to be biases in that data. From a health point of view, I think the best thing we can do with this type of data is really just say, here are areas in which we're observing a high propensity of this talk, right? And so these could be areas in which people are more susceptible. They aren't the only areas, and that's not certainly the only way that we should look at high-risk areas. It's just another source of data to use to kind of make that assessment, whether it should be a concern in that area or not. I think that is as far as we should go with data like this. We should not take it as, these are the people that believe vaccines cause autism. It goes way beyond data. And that's a great distinction.
Thank you so much.